Welcome to Camera Shake, where we bring you the insider scoop on all things photography and videography, giving you a unique opportunity to stay ahead of the curve. We've spent literally hundreds of hours interviewing some of the most renowned photographers of our time, giving you access to knowledge and expertise that's not available anywhere else. As always, I'm your host, Kirsten Nuts. And if you like me and you enjoy free podcast and YouTube content, you can support the show by buying us a coffee over at buymeacoffee.com/Camera Shake to help us create more exciting episodes for you. But of course, you're more than welcome to say no. Well, no hard feelings. Just know that your support really does make a difference. And don't forget, you can now grab official Camera Shake merch over at www.camerashakepodcast.com. So, without further ado, today's guest is someone who's photographed hundreds of magazine covers and built a career not just taking images, but helping brands grow through them. So let's give it up for commercial photographer, creative director, and brand strategist, James Patrick. James, man, how's it going?
Hey, doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Fantastic. Great to have you on the show, man. Um, Let me just start with the first question straight off. What At what point did you realize that just being a great photographer wasn't enough anymore to grow a successful business?
I don't know if I ever thought that being a great photographer was enough, simply because I never really considered myself particularly creative or talented, because I'm the worst when it comes to comparison syndrome, where I see everyone else's work and think, boy, everyone else is far more talented than me. And thus the only way that I'm gonna be able to build something is I'm just gonna have to work a little bit harder, to try to bring work in the door. And, that kind of, for better or worse, has kind of been with me throughout my entire career.
Yeah, it's like the sort of imposter syndrome thing. I can completely sympathize with that because that's like I feel that every day almost. Yeah.
I used Actually, I a couple years ago, I made these shirts that just said "imposter" on it. And the reason I did it was because I feel like so many of us, particularly in creative arts, struggle with feeling like we don't know what we need to know to be where we think we ought to be, that there's something that we still need to figure out, that there's another level, that there's another layer, that there's another thing, whatever it is that we have to aspire to. And then once we figure that out, then everything will be perfect. And what I realize is that we've been looking at imposter syndrome backwards. We've been looking at it as something that's holding us back. But if we were to slightly shift how we're looking at it, the perception of imposter syndrome, another way to look at imposter syndrome is, I'm just figuring it out. I'm still figuring it out. And to say that I'm still figuring it out sounds a lot less negative than I'm an imposter. So I tried to actually rebrand it by simply wearing a shirt that said imposter on it all the time, to say, hey, you know what? I'm an imposter. I'm still figuring it out. And that's okay, because that seems a lot less negative than I don't have what it takes to move forward.
It's a funny thing because we live in a world where we have access to so much information, via
Mm.
YouTube, like free information as well, via YouTube, but
Yeah.
and the internet in general, but also there's so many um what's the word, like guided learning paths, like Creative Life being a good example for that, or Learn, or something like that, where you have actually a sort of a curated learning path. Um, but we have so much more access to that kind of information and content now, which at the base of it is a great thing. But at the same time, it can also cause total overwhelm, which then leads to you feeling inadequate and like an imposter. And I think that's sort of the downside of living in this, in a world where we're just bombarded with all of these different bits of information. I mean, I can open Instagram and just look at five different photographers and feel totally inadequate every time I look at somebody else's profile. That's the thing.
The thing I'll add to that, because it is an important point, information at scale is free, and we've never had more ubiquitous access to information to develop what we want to develop. And some might look at that and say, well, there's no excuse. You have no excuse. You have YouTube, you have free resources like this show right here. There's no excuse not to equip yourself with the resources you need. And whilst I don't disagree with that, I do believe that we also need to acknowledge that some people might not know even what questions they should be asking because their starting line was so much different. And when we have different starting lines, we're not all equipped with the same information or just the baseline definitions of what we need to know. And that's why it's important to have conversations like the ones you have on your show, where some people might look at it and be like, well, that seems too introductory or that seems too perfunctory, that's too basic. Well, yeah, it might be basic for you because you may have learned about this in school, or you may have learned about this from a mentor. You may have had access to this before. But the more we put out information at scale like this, I do think the more it opens up people who might not have even thought to ask certain questions. And I think that's what will start to level the playing field a lot more and start to raise up some of the starting lines of people who maybe have felt like they have been struggling a little bit too long.
Do you think that there's a base level in terms of skill, or the basic skill level, let's say, of your average portrait photographer, or headshot photographer, something like that, is now higher than it used to be, let's say, in the 80s, for example?
I would say that the barrier for entry has dipped, meaning that, there was such a period of time where the cost alone to become a photographer was so prohibitive that if you were going to invest in the gear to be a photographer, the idea of understanding how to use the equipment really came with that. And because the cost has dropped so much, and because there are so many just affordable prosumer models, that really has opened up who can access it. And I can't tell you the number of times I'm a kind of a Facebook market junkie. The number of times I jump on Facebook Marketplace and I see people offloading tons of professional gear simply because it was something that they thought they wanted to do, but they realized it wasn't for them for whatever reason, whether that's true or not, or whether it's just true because they believe it's true, and thus they're trying to sell off this gear. Well, this is gear that for so many years would have been unfathomable for people to purchase, but now they can just add it to their Amazon cart and get it. So I don't think the necessarily the quality has shifted, but I do think who can access the industry has shifted, and that has democratized it in a lot of ways, but also I feel that there are way more potential clients that are in the marketplace than ever before, simply because there are now creatives at every price point from free all the way up to very expensive, and you will have clients that will fit into, any one of those frameworks.
Do you think anything has changed from the client's expectation, perspective?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I look at it where I don't think we as creatives have as much control over the industry as the actual person purchasing. I think they're the ones that control the marketplace a lot more than we can control the marketplace. So when people will talk about, oh, there's a photographer in my city and he's undercharging and he's destroying the marketplace, I don't really think so. I think it's consumer demand that is changing the marketplace. So you could look at this and you can look back to the film versus digital when that was happening a couple decades ago, and you could say, well, digital technology changed how photography is done. Yes, but the caveat, the other variable is clients demanded digital assets. If clients didn't care about digital assets, this would have been a fad, never would have happened. Same thing with social media. There were photographers who looked at it and say, well, social media, it's a kid's game. Real professionals, we don't need to be on social media. That's not where we're going to get work. Well, what happened? Client expectations and demands where we want to find and connect with people we want to work with leveraging these social channels. So if you were not there, you became irrelevant. The same thing happened with kind of the growing of video assets and clients wanting video assets along with still assets. Well, once again, consumer demand is shifting what the expectations are from the people that they're working with. So, absolutely, things are changed. Things have always been changing. So, I think it's incumbent upon us as creative professionals to be anticipating not just what our consumers are wanting today, but what are they going to be wanting tomorrow, and then being able to meet those needs. And I think that is the service part of this industry.
Now, a lot of the time, when I talk to people, or fellow photographers, a lot of the time, one of the things that I hear is, nowadays you have to be so much more than just a photographer. Now you have to be, you know, uh, you have to be into branding, and you have to be a
Mhm.
marketer, and you have to do all of these other things. And I think to myself, well, whilst that's true, has it actually ever been any different?
Nope. Nope. There's this it's very halcyon, which is, things used to be better, quote unquote. Back in my day, we didn't have to do that. And they're really ignoring the work that they used to have to do. I mean, in order to and this wasn't that long ago, but in order to land clients in New York, particularly publishing clients, I had to get on a plane and I had to go to New York and I had to run my book around Manhattan, physically run a physical book around Manhattan. And I had to knock on physical doors to get physical meetings with physical photo editors and creative directors. And I don't do that as much anymore because I can access them in so many other ways, but it wasn't that long ago that I was doing that. So, this idea that, "Oh, things were better," that no, I was still trying to build a brand. I was still trying to get attention. I was still trying to then take attention and build it into relationships. This idea that we didn't have to do that before is really misremembering the past.
And I think the key word is building relationships, actually.
Oh,
That's the
yes.
thing. I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine, Tommy, and we were talking about, you know, uh, when we were starting out, and I remember he said, like, when he used to live in this small town in the county of Kent, and he wanted to establish himself as the local photographer, the go-to guy. And so he just basically put a suit on and went from store to store to store, introducing himself, talking to the owners, handing over cards. Again, a very physical, old-fashioned, in inverted commas, approach to doing that. Um, I think maybe especially younger photographers might be falling into the trap of thinking that just sending out emails might be enough, or doing everything from behind the screen. But I do actually think that these traditional methods of just making physical contact still work, and maybe actually put you ahead of the game because a lot of other people, the competition, don't feel like they want to take that approach anymore.
I would even argue that many of them aren't even sending emails. I was doing a portfolio review at a college here, and I looked at, I don't know, let's say 100 portfolios. Everyone was fine. Some great, but everyone was fine, meaning every single student who was about to graduate had a book of work that was commercially viable. Not one person had work that would not be hireable. And that should be a big eye-opening thing because my next question I asked them, they're wanting comments on their work, and what am I gonna say? "Your work's fine. It's fine. It's good." Like, I can't give you really much creative feedback on your work. It's fine. Like, it will get better the more you do it. Um, but then I would ask, "Okay, so what are you doing right now to try to generate work or try to get your work seen?" And the response was always, "Well, I set up a website and I'm gonna set up an Instagram." 100% said the exact same thing. I was like, "And then what?" And there was no answer to, "And then what?" If I have 100 students every year in just this local market graduating from just one of the half a dozen plus colleges in this town with commercially viable work, that is 100 new competitors times 6, 600 new competitors every single year entering the marketplace. And if not one of them is approaching clients, I don't have a thing to worry about because
That's true.
I will be approaching clients. I will be identifying who I want to be working with. Listen, I love the client inbounds we get from my website. I love it. I love the client inbounds we get from social media. I'm all for it. I love word of mouth referrals. I cannot budget a business around people finding my website. I cannot budget a business around people sliding into my DMs, and I cannot budget a business around hoping someone sends me a referral. That's the icing on the cake. What I can budget my business on is the work I go out and I get myself. And I go out and get it by myself by identifying the clients I want to be working with, really honing in and focusing on who is it that I am best suited to work with, approaching that client, showing what I can do that solves their problems, staying in touch with them until I get an opportunity to solve their problems, and then maintaining that relationship over time. Every longstanding client I've had, I've gone through that exact same process of identifying what they need, showing that I can solve what they need, delivering on it, making sure I do good work, and then staying in touch with them. And around and around and around it goes. And the more I do that, the more opportunities get referred to me, which is great. But this is not different from when I was building my business in the sports industry and the fitness industry 20 years ago, identifying what are the magazines that are hiring this. Well, let me meet every decision maker of those publications, which is why I was going out to New York. And let me show what I can do for them. And one by one, getting hired by them. Well, I'm doing the same thing 25 years into my career now. I just landed a new client this week. How did I land the new client? Well, I met this client. They were doing a production at the studio I own. They did not hire me. They just happened to be doing a production here. I then reached out to them to say, "It's so great hosting the production you had here. I've been looking at the work you've been doing. I've been looking at the creative you've been putting out. Here's how I think I can help you. Here's what I think I can do for you." Their marketing person then gave me a call. They said, "Yeah, we loved hosting at your studio, took a look at your work. Thank you so much for saying it over. Can you give us an estimate on what you could do for what you just pitched?" Absolutely. Here's the proposal. Here's the creative approach. And we already got the project. That is what we're talking about. Identifying who it is you want to be working with, approaching them with what you can do for them, staying in touch. And this is a big one. I can't tell you. We would go through this when we were teaching people how to pitch to media outlets. People send off a pitch to a client. Let's say you are doing email. You send off an email. "Hey, I'd love to work with you. Here's my work," and you don't hear back. You're not going to hear back. Why would you? Not everyone has time to respond to every email that they get. You don't respond to every email that you get. You get tons of emails for, "Hey, we want to edit your photos," or, "Hey, we provide AI clipping services," or,
Every
"Hey,
day. Every
every day,"
day.
or,
Yeah.
"Hey, we can help get listeners to your podcast. We'll cut your podcast up." And I get the same emails every day. I don't respond to all of them. So why do we assume people are going to respond to well, ego, right? Ego, and we don't want to feel like, once again, an imposter. Um, so in a couple weeks, I'm going to send a follow up, and in a couple weeks, I'm going to send another follow up, and then another one, and another one, and another one, and another one, and another one, until forever. Like, that's just what it is. And you might think, well, are you spamming them? Are you annoying them? No, they'll tell me if I'm annoying them. They'll put me in spam if I'm annoying them. Here's the key, I think, to a good follow up. A good follow up is not, "Hey, just following up." No one wants that. Because then you kind of made them feel like, I get that when people are pitching to be on my show, where they're like, "Hey, I'd love to be on your show. Here's what I want to talk about." And if I don't respond, they say, "Hey, just bring this to the top of your inbox." Now I feel like a jerk for not responding. Thanks for making me feel like a jerk. Um, Probably still not going to have you on my show now. But a good follow-up would be to do one of two things. Number one would be to add more context to what your original pitch was. So, for example, let's say I am pitching to be on your show. And I say, "I want to come on your show and I want to talk about the 4 steps it takes to get published." Okay. And you don't respond. I might then follow up with saying, you know, "Here's some examples of how these 4 steps have helped other people, and these are some of the things I could talk about on your show." Okay, so I've now added more context to my pitch. Let's look at it from a photography perspective. I'm pitching to a magazine. "Hey, I'd love to do some creative sports portraiture for your publication." You don't hear back. "Hey, just coming back around, here's some examples I did for a similar publication that I think aesthetically and stylistically would match what I would wanna do for your publication. You're adding more context to your pitch. The other way you can follow up is you just send a whole new pitch. Like, "Hey, if that idea doesn't work for you, here's another idea that I do think works for you." And you can volley back and forth between these forever. Or your follow-up could have nothing to do with you, and this is where you start to remove that transactional pitch where everything feels like, "Hey, give me work, give me work, give me work." Um, I'm a big proponent of subscribing to local media, particularly local business media. Most of my work is commercial. So I get, local business journals, business publications, magazines, blogs, podcasts, etc., because I want to have my finger on the pulse of what's happening in my marketplace. So when I see a prospective client in the news, which happens all the time, I let them know. "Hey, I saw your feature in the Phoenix Business Journal. Awesome job. Hey, I just saw you recognized for top realtors in Southern Arizona. Very cool." And all of a sudden now I have another reason to stay in touch with them. I'm letting them know that I'm seeing the work that they're doing. And clients like that.
Hey, let me just jump in real quick to tell you about the amazing sponsor of this episode, Platypod. Platypod offers innovative camera support systems designed to unleash your creativity. With their stable, versatile, and portable solutions, you can capture stunning shots like never before. And I'm not just saying that. As the host of the Camera Shake podcast, I can personally vouch for Platypod's incredible products. They've become an integral part of the show. In fact, I'm surrounded by various Platypod products holding up lights, cameras, microphones, and so on. It's really helped to transform the way I make the show and the way I shoot at home, in the studio, and on location. But don't just take my word for it. Explore Platypod's website at www.platypod.com to discover their range of products, including the Platypod Extreme, Platypod tripod heads, and the brand new handle, of course. Make sure to follow Platypod on Instagram and Facebook at Platypod Tripods for exclusive updates, tips, and giveaways. By choosing Platypod, you're not only investing in your photography, but you're also supporting the Camera Shake Photography Podcast. Thanks again to Platypod, our amazing sponsor. Platypod, where innovation never sleeps. In your opinion, what's the most effective way of getting in touch with prospective clients? Is it, is it picking up the phone? Is it is it email? Is it LinkedIn? What do you
I
think
don't
is?
pick up the phone anymore simply because I don't like getting phone calls. And so if I don't like getting phone calls and I don't like my phone ringing, I have to assume that I'm not the only one. I feel like email is the least intrusive, meaning I'm not going to offend someone by emailing them. LinkedIn, I'm really trying to wrap my mind around LinkedIn, but I've been saying that for 20 years and I've never successfully done it.
Yeah.
I want to think it works. I've been told it works. Here's the only way I've seen LinkedIn work for me is reconnecting with professionals I already have some pre-established connection with.
Yeah.
Then I've seen it work where I'm connecting with people that I've met at an event or that I've, worked on a campaign with, or that I knew tangentially because they were a colleague at a firm I was with. That I've seen success with, just reconnecting and establishing a conversation. Um, Email aside, the number one thing is in-person events for me. So, for example, there's an event happening in a couple weeks here in Arizona, and it is in a industry that I want to be very active in. It's in the professional service industry, which I have a lot of experience with, and I wanna meet all the decision makers. I wanna meet all these people who I could procure work from. So, at this event, there's going to be 5 to 600 decision makers. Every single one of them can be a potential client. That is a lot of potential clients in a single room. So, what I'm doing at this trade show is I'm setting up a free headshot booth. And I'm going to offer free headshots to any ticketed attendee of this event. And the only people who go to this event, this is not a cheap event, are people who are decision makers in the industry that I want to be in, all for different companies, all throughout the entire state. And I'm offering them something of value. I'm going to give you a free headshot. Only one person per company or two people per company are going. So it's not like I'm giving away entire corporate portfolios, but I'm now meeting with people. I'm delivering a service. I'm having a chance to interact with them. I'm having a chance to get their information. and thus I'm having a chance to start a relationship with them. This is a no-brainer for me. Like, it's gonna cost me what, 1 day plus editing plus my assistant's time for the day. We're not talking about a massive expenditure, but I'm gonna get access to hundreds and hundreds of business leads out of this event. So when I think about going to events, the worst thing you can do is you go to a networking event, you pay a fee, you go, you have a few cocktails, maybe you shake 2 hands, and then you leave. There was no transmission of value there. But if you go to an event and you can be involved in the event somehow, like in this one, I was like, well, I could set up a free headshot booth. Like that cost me nothing but time and paying an assistant. Or is there a chance to speak at an event? That is huge. If you can speak at an event, at a chamber of commerce, at a professional trade organization, these are the rooms where all the decision makers are in. Any way that you can get into that room beyond just being a fly on the wall, but add value to that room, that's going to be your main lead generator.
It's actually not a bad idea. I mean, it's worthwhile checking out, your local convention center wherever you live and see what the program is for the upcoming year and just pick some of the industries that you might want to get involved in and do exactly that.
Mhm. Yeah, it's like there's a few different industries that I love to work in. One is the professional service industry, which is, for those not familiar, architecture, engineering, and construction. I have a big background in that industry, and thus I want to meet all the marketing directors and marketing coordinators and creative directors at all these different architecture, engineering, and construction management firms throughout the Southwest. Well, they're all going to be at this event. So that's where I'm going to be. The other industry that I'm really big in is the corporate law industry. I work with lots of corporate law firms. So I'm going to look for marketing trade organizations of marketing professionals, creative director professionals, PR professionals, communication professionals who specialize in working in the legal field. And these industries exist, or these organizations already exist. So every year I pick up, we have in Phoenix the Book of Lists. And the Book of Lists not only lists all the companies throughout the valley in all these different organizations, which already is like a really cool lead tool. But one of the things it lists out is all the professional trade organizations in Arizona. And there's a trade organization for everything you could think of. Well, how can I get into that trade organization, be a member of that trade organization, or present to that trade organization? If you don't know where to start, Chamber of Commerces are a phenomenal entry point. And there's like 20 throughout Phoenix alone because there's not just Phoenix, there's North Phoenix, there's Gilbert, there's Chandler, there's Mesa, there's Tempe, there's eh, North Scottsdale, like every little subset. Once it feels like it can bolster up a big enough membership, they're going to form a chamber around that. And what a way to meet great local business owners and show up and be a member of the community.
What about local networking groups? Like I'm thinking like things like BNI, for example, or like networking. There seems to well, there seem to be new networking groups springing up left, right, and center virtually every week. What do you think about those?
I've met people who swear by them, and I've met people who are frustrated by them. I would be in the latter camp. I and so I can't speak to any effective strategy on how to properly get the most ROI out of it, because what I found when I was in those rooms, or when I've been invited to be a guest in those rooms, was it was really hard to have an authentic conversation with someone because everyone in that room was trying to sell.
Right.
No one was there to learn. No one was there just to connect. Everything was a sale. Everything was, what can I get from you? And can I get it from you before you can get it from me? That's what that room felt like. And thus it didn't feel as genuine as I would have hoped for. So I didn't succeed in that, but that could just be because I haven't spent a lot of time or really invested a lot in figuring out how to make something like that work.
Yes, I think you get to be extraordinarily lucky to find a networking group that actually really works long term. I think you're right. It's often the mistake that people make is that they're trying to sell to the people in the room when really you want to create relationships that allow you to access those people's circles, and that's a much more of a long-term, um, agenda, so to say, rather than just rocking up at a room and hoping you're gonna sell 10 headshot sessions to 10 of the businesses in the room, you know? Because everybody else is like you say, everybody else is trying to sell you their window frames and, like, you know, house
Their carpet
extensions.
cleaning
Yeah,
services, which
exactly.
I get it, yeah, yeah, and I worked with a guy who, was in one of those, and it seemed like he was getting work through it, but it was always really difficult to tell, is he getting work that he's being compensated for, or is this just kind of like we're just patting each other on the back by trading out services? It was never very clear what that was.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, like I said, I've popped into, I wanna say, like, 3 times total in 20 years, so I don't have a ton of experience with it, but each time I did not feel satisfied with what the connections were when I walked out of that room.
Yeah, it's quite difficult to gauge. So when I moved to this area, you know, and I was new in this area, I joined a number of networking groups, um, just right after COVID. And you know, my experience was they're very different experiences actually. You know, some are very expensive,
Mhm.
and you know, it's difficult to justify the financial outlay vis-a-vis the return that you could potentially get. You know, others are very inexpensive or sometimes free even. But then the bar is relatively low, which means that people might not necessarily be that committed. So then, you know, again, it becomes an investment of time, which may or may not be justified. You know, and so I think it'd be for me. It was a useful tool to get to know local businesses because I didn't know anybody in this area at all. Um, you know, but I think in terms of generating revenue in the long term, um, it's not really that. So personally, I stay away from networking groups that charge a whole ton. You know, the argument is always like, oh well, but then people are so much more committed. You know, because they're financially committing to being a member. Blah blah blah. But I don't really see the necessarily the relevance to it because ultimately it's still the same. Everybody's still trying to sell you stuff. So
Yeah. I yeah, it's frustrating because I want to be on the side of there's no wrong answer. So if someone can say, "Here's how I've made this work," I stand corrected, and I'm glad you can
yeah,
make it work. But I think, like, that's being very self-aware of the types of rooms you want to be in and the type of person you are in those rooms. Um, I don't I'm not much of a, uh, pushy salesperson. That's not really something that sits well with me. And so this idea of, like, it being more of a pitch fest feels it's not the environment that I would succeed in. Whereas, an environment where I'm giving a presentation, I'm just giving value, or I'm giving a service like that headshot thing I mentioned, or I had done one where I approached a trade organization and says, "Hey, you just elected a new board of directors. Let me film interviews with all your board of directors, and you can have, like, a membership recruitment video. I'm not gonna charge you for it." And the idea was the same thing, like, let me just get in front of you guys, and it worked great. Like, I was able to land a few leads off that. That to me feels a little bit more authentic because I'm giving something, I'm providing value, and by providing value, I'm making relationships that hopefully turn into something down the road versus, stand up and give a 2-minute elevator pitch of your business. Mm, I it works for some, and I'm happy for them. It's rough for me.
yeah. It's also the same pitch every week. You know, which is the other thing. It's like, you know, 6 weeks in, you think like, well, you should know by now what I'm doing. Now I don't have to repeat. Why am I repeating myself all the time?
I feel like I was at one recently where they were like everyone had memorized everyone else's mantra or mission statement or something like that, and they'd, like, repeat their mantra or mission statement back to them, and I was like, "That's a very closed circle at that point. We're not growing if everyone knows everyone's mission statement."
Yeah, there's one particular group, and I won't mention the name of it. It's 3 letters. People will know what I'm talking about. That was very clan-like, I have to say. It was
Yeah.
very bizarre.
Yeah, I used to run events and we would get 5 to 600 attendees at our events. And there's when you do events long enough, whether it's large conferences or we ran masterminds for a while, we ran inner circles for a while, there's a cult of personality that evolves with that. And for sales, you lean into that a lot. And like I said, it's not something I enjoy doing, which is why I don't really do it anymore. But you can hear it in sales speak all the time. Like, if I'm standing on stage and I have 500 people there and I'm trying to sell them something, I'm going to say something along the lines of, um, the people who've chosen to be in this room are different from the people who are outside this room. You in this room, you've made a commitment. You've shown up. You not only got access to this to a ticket, you actually showed up. You walked in the door. You're sitting in the seat, and that separates you from those who are outside of this room. And we are creating a contrast. Really, we're creating a contrast to ingratiate and embolden the people sitting in that room to feel like they've done something that everyone else has not done. And why are we doing that? Because we're gonna ask them to do something else, which is buy a ticket into something else, buy an upsell. You can hear that now, and all of it comes with that developing that cult of, we are part of this and no one else is a part of this. And I think like there are ways that it can be done that is authentic and not very nefarious, but you definitely see the nefarious elements of it, particularly in a lot of these like big groups or clusters or inner circles or masterminds where people really lean into that they're a part of this and you're not a part of it.
And also then there are elements of punishment if you don't perform, and that's to me is always that's bizarre. Like I could never wrap my
Yeah,
head
it's like
around it.
financial penalization, right?
It's basically well, or threats of being excluded from the group. If you don't reach a set number of referrals, for example, which immediately makes the whole thing feel extremely fake because now people just trying to get random referrals that are worthless just in order
Yeah, and
to
it's like,
stay in a group.
what if your business sucks? I don't wanna like,
But this is
like
yeah, and these are conversations I've had, with people, who've been members in some of those groups, for a long time. And they're basically like, well, you feel like you have to refer somebody, but if you don't believe that their service is any good, then this might actually harm your own business because you're referring somebody to some of your clients. And so this, I don't necessarily think that's it's a working, at least for the long term. It might work, to establish yourself in an area, like in a new area, for example, and make connections and stuff quickly. But I think in the long term, I don't see that working.
yeah, Chamber of Commerce, often less expensive and no weird rules that keep you a member of the organization, like, or that, like, hold your like, you're spending thousands of dollars and they're like, "If you don't refer us, we're gonna keep your money." Come on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's a there's a one particular group has a if you miss 2 sessions a year, you're out,
Yeah.
basically, which is like, I was like, really? I mean, you've just laid down several £1,000, to be a member, and then you got to deal with that. That's
I
just
My kids don't hold me to that standard, like,
exactly.
I missed I missed my son's baseball game last week. I was mortified. I don't think he noticed.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's certain things. I think there's certain things that I can afford to miss, and other things where it becomes difficult,
Yeah,
especially.
I'm sorry. I'm not prioritizing this breakfast coffee meetup if I have like, if a client project comes up, sorry, like,
Yeah,
there's something else is going to take priority, like,
exactly. Yeah, I
I
mean,
will
that's
miss 2 meetings
exactly.
easily.
I say the same thing. I say the same thing all the time. I'm invited to speak at like events like that, and I'm perfectly happy to do it unless something comes up that's actually business. In which case. The priority is clear. Um, I want to take it. I want to look at it from the other side for a minute, and that's basically the client hiring you as a photographer. Um, I think, especially in the commercial world, photographers are much more involved now in, if it's not creating branding for the client, it's certainly working in tandem with existing branding. And so I always feel that photographers nowadays have to be a lot more aware of all of these aspects, including aspects of graphic design, brand strategy, all these kind of things. What do you think are the typical things that photographers, especially in beginning, tend to get wrong or misunderstand about those needs that clients have these days?
I think if you're not thinking about the end in mind, you're setting yourself up to potentially disappoint your client. So one of the things that we ask our client going into any project is what makes this project a success for you? Like what is the thing that will ensure this project is a success? And it's easy to look at something as simple as like a portrait headshot. This doesn't seem to have a lot of gravity to it. But if, for example, you don't understand that this company you're working for has a very consistent lighting setup across all their portraits, all their offices, and you're the one that is not consistent, well, that's going to make the marketing person who hired you look bad. And that's rough for them, and that will become rough for you. So, just understanding like what is the application? Where is this going? What would ensure that this is a success? And that intro question in the pre-production ensures, or at least helps to ensure, that you're going to deliver something that the client can actually use. And I think that is the most important thing, which is this going to be usable? Are they actually going to be able to put this into the marketplace? So, like, we landed a client not long ago, and we, in our intro discovery call, learned that they have a very specific style that they want all their portraits in. Okay, well, let's deconstruct that, ensure that we match that style exactly. So this is not our time to, be like, well, creatively, we don't like that and we think this is better. No, there's 100 offices. Like, we're controlling one office. Like, we do not have that weight to do that. And let's just take their style that is established and let's make it the best we can so that the portraits we create are on brand across the entire company. And lo and behold, now they're sending us to all the different offices to replicate what we've done, which was on brand, but we just think we did it better. So now we're replicating it across all their different offices. Great. So we turned understanding their brand into more work. So I think that's the big thing, is what is the application? What are we using this for? Because if you don't understand that, then all of a sudden now you're caught in this post-production nightmare, or this endless loop of revisions. And that's not a fun place to be.
How important is it to really understand your client's messaging? Because I can imagine, I mean, that plays a massive role in the work that you do. But how far do you sort of deep dive into those kind of aspects of their marketing?
I look at it when I'm actually doing the proposal, because that's part, like, when I bid on a project, it is not a sheet of numbers. Like, that is one page of a bid, but most of my bid is a creative approach. This is how I'm going to execute this project. And part of that creative approach means that I have to look into what they're already doing, because I have to get a sense of where this is actually going. So I just landed a project in Chicago, and I it's part 3 of a project that we started with laying out, looking at all the creative they've done before, what their mission is, what they're trying to achieve with this project. It's a growth and acquisition strategy. And then here is our approach on how we're going to execute this project to match your goals. So for us, it started on day 1, like, it was baked into the proposal, and thus all the creative we then ended up producing was in response to what we said we were going to do that the client signed off on. Um, we have another client, they do golfs and country clubs and resorts, and so every country club and resort has its own identity. And thus, we can't just copy and paste, one club to another club simply because there's different members, there's different demographics, there's different locations, there's different vibes and energy. So in our intro calls, we ask the client, like, what are some of the things that are unique or signature or special or that make your club or your resort or your country club or your hotel stand out? What do your members get excited about the most? And we need to know that because that's what we need to ensure that we capture and that we put into the final package for you. So yeah, it starts on day 1 of like we propose on understanding what the client is trying to do, and here's how we're going to help achieve that.
But that's actually interesting. I want to examine the idea of putting that package together a little bit. So in your experience, how like over the last, I don't know, 10 years or something, how have the client's needs changed? I know in my business, um, uh, a very simple statistic that I always give is like, before the pandemic, um, about 5% of my clients required video.
Mm.
Now, since this would have been 2019, I guess. So now in 2026, that's actually gone up to about 70%. That's a huge increase in in what my clients require or demand or or expect, so to say. But in your experience, how have clients' needs changed over time?
So video 100%. And that is something that I I don't know if the variable is the fact that I opened myself up to doing video in the last 5 years is the reason I've seen more clients hire me for video. Because we did have a lot of clients asking for video before, but we would always have to sub it out, and when we're subbing it out, that changes what the fee structure is, and thus it we can't control what's being charged, because it is incumbent on whatever sub-consultant we bring in. But I would say overwhelmingly, we are seeing more desire for video assets versus still assets. So, the amount of video exclusive projects we're getting hired for versus where we would normally get hired for stills and videos, I would say that has increased. Um, I would say another thing that has come up a lot is clients want more access to the assets than
Right.
before.
Okay.
Um, and this is a very dangerous area because a lot of people get really agitated about this topic because photographers never disagree about anything. We're always on the same page about everything, especially raw assets. But we've seen more clients ask for raw assets for everything. Raw assets of video, raw assets of photo, and I'm not saying you have to do it by any means, like, your business is yours, and you know what's best for your business, and you know what's best for your clients, but that is becoming way more common, and because it's becoming way more common, you have to be prepared on how you choose to answer that or how you choose to approach that. For me and for what works for my business, I'm comfortable giving a client access to more assets for a price. I'm absolutely comfortable with that. And the reason I'm comfortable with that is a lot of the fears we have about it. Number 1 is, well, that means they own the copyright, not in the US. I still own the copyright. They only have copyright to what I grant them copyright to. Number 2 is that if they have raw assets, they'll ruin it. Why would they? That doesn't make any sense. Like, they don't wanna look bad. I work with really good clients. They're only gonna produce good work. Um, Number 3 is it means they can use a lot more. Yes, but I'm charging them for that. Like, I'm not giving them assets without a price tag, and number 2, they're using about the same number of assets they were using before. If I take 30,000 photos on a campaign, they're not gonna use 30,000 photos, they're gonna use 30. Same I would have charged them for, right? They just want the idea that they don't lose the other 29,970 photos. They don't wanna feel like they lost that. So if they wanna pay for that access, I'm fine charging them for that access. But not everyone's gonna agree with that, and that's up to them and their business. But what they should be prepared to do is answer when clients say, "Well, we want access to this," and how you are going to manage that for your business. Because fumbling of, "Well, I don't know," that doesn't build confidence with the client. Saying, "Here's what we can do, and here's why we can do it," or "Here's why we're not doing that, but here are your other options." Having a prepared approach to that, that is a professional response.
Yeah, I mean, I get occasional requests for that. I wouldn't say that necessarily it's something that's prevalent necessarily. Um, but yeah, I mean that again, you can put a price on anything. Very often, by the way, this is in my experience, when that discussion starts and I then put a price on it, then all of a sudden, um, the need to have these extra assets seems to be less important. That's often the thing.
Yeah. And there are other ways to mitigate it, which is like, for example, um, we can, like on a video project, we can eliminate all footage that we don't consider viable. And that, you know, that is part of our approach. But there are clients who are like, no, we want to see every second that was recorded. Oh, okay. Yeah, fine. But is every second that's going to be recorded going to end up in the final package? No. No, but they just want the idea of access. They want that control, and if it benefits the relationship to give them more control and have them be more of a creative partner in this, okay, fine. Yeah, we can show you every second we recorded, knowing that you're not going to use 99% of it. That's fine.
What do photographers often sort of misunderstand about the idea of branding in general? Especially, I'm thinking of photographers who come at it from a creative perspective, or even from a technical perspective. What is sort of the main aspects they tend to misunderstand about branding in general?
I think a brand is I'd heard someone describe it as an emotional aftertaste, and that really stuck with me because the idea of a brand is beyond just what your website looks like or what your logo looks like or what your business card looks like. I mean, all of these are touch points. I'm fine with all of it, but I feel like it's everything that embodies the work you do, from how you create, so stylistically what your work looks like. And when I can create work and someone can say, "I knew you created that and your name wasn't on it, but just because that was your style," hey, that's a win for me because that means that the brand I've done or created has entrenched itself within that industry. But also, I think it's your reputation. I think it's how you work with clients. I think it's your professionalism on set. Um, we had a client reach out to us and yesterday, and they said, "Well, we have a project, and they're across the country. We're nervous about hiring someone from another area, and we're thinking of hiring local." And they were upfront about this in their email. But this other person you work with spoke so highly about you, so we're open to having a conversation. Now, we didn't pitch them. They came to us, and they came to us because they said someone else talked you up enough that we're willing to go beyond our what we feel safe with, which is hiring locally. Is there a way we can hire you? And is there a way that you can do this where you can settle our fears that we have about this? That's brand. That's a brand we established, that we are trustworthy enough that someone is willing to overlook their reservations about hiring someone outside of their area because of rescheduling and weather complications and all that. I feel like that's what we think about when we think about with brand, and every interaction you have with a client, every interaction you have with a prospect, every interaction you have with even someone that you don't even think could be a client is either adding to or subtracting from your overall brand. I worked for a photographer for many years as an assistant, and even after I worked for him, we'd go out to lunch all the time. And this is someone who still to this day doesn't have a website, barely on social media. I don't think he's ever posted any of his work on social media. I think he just has a social media because he was told he had to have one. But every time we went out to lunch, he would run into someone he knew, and they'd give him a hug and they'd say, "Oh, it's so great to run into you. Oh, by the way, we need to call you. We have this other project coming up, and we'd love to bring you in." I mean, this happened all the time. I cannot count the number of times he ran into someone who was so excited to see him and so excited to let him know that they wanted to hire him again. That's brand right there. That was his brand in the market. He didn't need a website for that. He didn't need a Google My Business. He didn't need a LinkedIn account. He built so many relationships, and those relationships were so entrenched in that community that they were so excited to see him and so excited to work with him. That's what I think about, and what I would encourage others to think about when they think about what their brand is. It's what do people think about you after you've left the room?
I think that a lot of the time, especially now, nowadays, I think especially new photographers probably think, or maybe even established photographers to a degree, so believe that when it comes to their own branding, there's an absolute necessity to branch out into lots of other fields like social media, like, I don't know, podcasting, YouTube, whatever, to build that personal brand. Is that really necessary?
No, no, it's where like, who are the people that you're trying to reach? So, like, I run a podcast for like yours for photographers. Photographers aren't my clients.
Exactly.
So, what does my podcast do for my brand as a person trying to get work? Nothing. 0. Oh, my hand wasn't on screen. 0. Um, Now, the reason I have a podcast and the reason I do like my social media is almost exclusively myopically for creatives is because I want to build those relationships for something I want to release. I've been working on a book for about 2 years. I've been working on some projects for a number of years that I want to put in front of creative professionals. So, I'm doing this with intention. But before I did this, I had to do the exact same thing, but for a completely different audience that I was trying to sell to. I worked in, like I mentioned, the sports and fitness industry for so many years, and I spent years building relationships and building awareness within that industry and within that brand. So I had a different podcast, but it was for that industry. I did speaking engagements. I wrote articles. I appeared as a guest on other shows. I worked very heavily in earned media simply to build awareness within that industry, giving value, giving tons and tons and tons of value, building relationships so that when I did have something to offer them, I had an audience that was ready for it. So it's yes, you can do these things. Like I am very big and I'm a huge proponent of content marketing, but not content marketing horizontally, content marketing vertically. Okay. Who is the audience? How can you get in front of them? So if we've mentioned like in-person networking events. That is a deep push because you have face-to-face interactions with them. But if you're not doing face-to-face marketing, or if you want to do something in addition to face-to-face marketing, where are you going to maximize your efforts? Where is the audience already? Because they're already congregating somewhere. So how do you get in front of them where they are? And then how do you give them a reason to enter your ecosystem? How do you then give them enough value so that you build trust and rapport with them? So it's not just, hi, I'm a photographer. I hope you hire me. Like, how do you get them to pay attention to you and to keep paying attention to you? And then ultimately, now you have a warm audience that you can serve with. Not everyone who meets you is ready to buy from you day one. Okay. Just because someone knows you doesn't mean they like and trust you. So, understanding that a client goes through a journey, All right. Where do we find the clients? How do we give them a reason to enter into our ecosystem? Once they're in our ecosystem, how do we nurture that awareness? And then we can then offer them a pitch or offer them something we can sell to them. And that could take some clients years to go from A to Z, right? Some clients, they can take an hour, right? But we can't treat every client like the client who takes an hour. We have to respect clients enough to understand that they might take years before they trust us enough that they want to swipe a credit card with us.
How do you guide clients who don't necessarily yet know what they actually need?
In what respects? Like they want to do a project, but they're not sure what sort of project or
Yeah, exactly. I mean, okay, I occasionally have calls, from clients who basically, they sort of know. A good example is at a recent client. They're launching a new website. They know they need headshots, but they don't really know. They know they need imagery for the website, but they don't really yet know really what they want or need at that point.
okay. So I was having a conversation with they've been an on and off client for 15 years. And they just bought a business and they're running this new business. It's a completely new industry for them. And I don't know how we got on the topic, but we were talking about social media and they said, I've been really bad at social media lately. I was like, well, give me context. Like, what does bad mean? They're like, well, I just know I need to be doing more. I'm like, do you? Like, for what reason? Like, explain that to me because like just being present on social media just seems like a lot of effort unless there's a strategy behind it. And they says, well, I need to be doing more to build more trust with our current audience. And thus I need to be creating content that builds that trust. I'm like, do you have an idea of what that content is? And they're like, I don't. I really don't. I'm like, well, let's talk about it. What are the clients that you're trying to get? And then we just kind of worked backwards through there. And I just gave them some ideas and that got them really excited. So now they're like, oh, hey, can we meet up for coffee and just talk about like what a project like this would look like? Yes, we can. Absolutely. So I guided them through. Okay, so they knew they needed something, but they didn't know what specifically that something was. Let's strategize about it. Let's just have an intake call. And if they'd never hire me, who cares? Like, what did that take? A half hour of my time? But what did that build in relationship equity? A lot, a lot. So even if they didn't end up hiring me, I built trust and rapport with them that maybe they consider me in the future, right? Simply by saying, okay, here's what I think would benefit you based on what you told me your goals were. Like, I've been doing this for 20 plus years. I know what assets work and what assets are not going to be worth your time. Okay. So instead of just saying, hey, let's just create content to create content, well, yeah, that's going to get me a job, but you're not going to hire me again because you wasted your money and you didn't have a return on that. But if I help you create something that gets you a return, hey, that's great. And if I've been doing this enough and I have some data, or if I have some proof of concept examples, which is, I mentioned we just landed that client the other day who had rented at our studio. I came to them with a pitch with proof of concept examples. Here's something I've done that I think would work really great for what you're doing. And that was a very clear way to show, okay, yeah, we see how this fits in what we're trying to do. So it's trying to guide them to their goals, which is just asking questions.
Now, it seems, I mean, all the different things that we've talked about, A, make perfect sense, B, are super relevant when it comes to, the sort of media landscape that we live in. Um, and I wonder if there are people out there thinking, well, you know, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got to be the branding, the brand strategist and the creative director and stuff. Like,
Mhm,
how am I going to charge for all of this?
mhm,
Like, how am I going to put value to that for the client? And I mean, I know this anecdotally. Well, I know this from conversations that I've had with, with fellow photographers, is that there seems to be a tendency to undervalue oneself massively. Or in other words, I feel like people undercharge. Um,
mhm.
Now, where is that sweet spot where you pay attention to what the market will be able to carry, and what's, a worthwhile compensation for your skill set at that point? Or is there a
Yeah.
sweet spot at all? How do you determine that?
Um, yeah, I'll let you know when I find it, but I I have this dueling anxiety, which is every time I put together a proposal and I'm sending out a pitch, I have this massive anxiety that I'm undervaluing my services and I'm undercharging. And the only thing, Kirsten, that prevents me from raising my rates is I have an equally compounding anxiety that I'm overcharging and that I'm over market value. And that is just this intense back and forth struggle. So what has helped me, and people can take this and apply it if they see value in it, is I spent a lot of time understanding my cost of doing business. So that meant I had to add up all my expenses from gear to replacements to repairs, the studio that I have, um, my team members, advertising, printed materials, toilet paper for the like everything that I could spend money on, I've tabulated, and I have a budget, okay, of what my anticipated expenses are in any year, okay? On top of that, I then add what I want to pay myself, what I want my salary to be, okay? Because if I'm not factoring that in, and I'm only trying to make money off of my expenses, well, then I end up with 0 at the end of the day. So, I know what I want to pay myself, all right? And I this is not an accurate number, but we're just gonna use round numbers. So, let's say my expenses are $40,000 a year, and let's say I wanna pay myself $60,000 a year. Okay. So, at minimum, I need to make $100,000, and I know that. Now now I have to figure out how much work I wanna do, and this is also important. So, there are 52 weeks in a year. I have a family, so let's say I wanna take 4 weeks of vacation, that leaves me 48 working weeks. Now, of those 48 working weeks, I don't like to work weekends. I only like to work 5 days a week. So, I have to take 48 times 5. What does that give me? Let's do some quick math here. 48 times 5 is 240 hours. Okay. Now, I also have to anticipate how much of my time is spent doing administrative work versus doing actual production work. For me, I spend about 70% of my time doing admin work. Like, I would consider, like, I'm sitting in my office right now. This is a work hour, but I'm on a show. This is admin time. When I'm cleaning my studio, that's admin time. I have no productions today. Today's a 100% admin day. Okay. So if only 30% of my time is production days, let's just say, okay, so 240 times zero point 0.3, that means 72 hours I am actually producing work. 72 hours. I have to make enough during those 72 hours that I am actually paying myself for all my administrative hours. So let's just look at that. $100,000 divided by 72 hours. Yeah, I need to make about $1,400 an hour when I'm doing productions. That's not accurate because I've done that math before. Um, or I should, to clarify, that's not accurate for where my business is. I'm about between 3 and 400 an hour is what I need to be making to hit my goals. Okay. So I know that when I do a production and I estimate the hours I'm working on that production, I need to make between 3 and $400 an hour. That is kind of where I like to start. And that's how I can suss out where my pricing is. But the biggest variable in this that we've not addressed, this is just assuming every client is the same market value. They're not. Okay.
Yeah.
I have $500 clients. I have $50,000 clients. Okay. That take the exact same amount of time. Right. So I spend most of my time chasing the ladder because it's just going to put more cushion in the bank. So I work on a really top tier client. I don't need a lot of them, half a dozen. and I've met my budget for the year, right? That's all those $500 clients or headshot clients or free work like I'm doing in a couple weeks. I can afford to do that because I've gotten a few of these big clients. So what separates a big client from what separates a $50,000 from a $5,000 or $500 client? What they're using the images for, right? A large corporation is going to use the images exponentially more than someone getting headshots, exponentially more. Someone running a full nationwide ad campaign is getting exponentially more usage out of that creative than someone who just needs videos for their LinkedIn account or someone who needs me to produce their podcast. These are not the same types of clients. They're not using the images the same. I cannot be charging someone who's just starting a podcast production. Like we were recording a podcast production all day yesterday. It's just a person who is excited to make a podcast with their family. Where's that going? Probably to their extended family. Like this is not getting a ton of usage out of it versus, I'm going out to Chicago to film for a corporate law firm. Okay. That is going to get exponentially more usage. I'm spending about the same amount of time for each. If I were to tabulate it all together, I can't price them equally. Okay. So that's that extra variable, which is where is this being used? And I think that's what we need to factor in when we're trying to price accurately for our clients. It's not just our time. Like I know what I should be making per hour based off how I've done the math, but where is this being used? And that's where we can start to build profit versus just revenue.
I think strategically, what it also means is that, if you think about your time and especially your marketing time, because the way I think is like, I always think, I think of it in terms of being in front or behind the camera. Well, no, behind the camera or in front of the computer, I want to say. And always my mantra is always, if I'm behind the camera, I'm making money. If I'm in front of a computer screen, I'm losing money because I spend a lot of time editing, let's say, in which time, during which time I can't either be shooting or working on the marketing side of things, and so when it comes just purely to the marketing element of it, there are two main factors. It's time and money, time and budget, if you want. And so in the case that you just described, I suppose the smart thing to do is to put your marketing researchers, i.e., time and budget, to market to those high value clients rather than to the little low budget or low, whatever the word is, low budget headshot clients, for example.
Yeah, for me, that's what I want in my career. I love working with corporate clients. I like working on these bigger campaigns. That brings me joy. It brings me happiness. It's what I like to be doing. I haven't always done this. There was a time where most of my clients were between $500 and $1,500. Most of my clients. It meant I had so many more clients to manage. And for a period of my life, I really liked it. I was having a blast doing it. And for that season, that's where I was. And I was doing really well at it. It was a lot of time, it was a lot of client management, but I was really happy with the work I was doing. So once again, I don't think there's a wrong answer. I think it's clarity. With where I'm at right now, I would get really burnt out having nothing but 500 to $1,000 clients. That would really tax me. And I'm not there right now. That's not what I want. I want to be working on these different campaigns. I want to be traveling. I want to be working on these corporate productions. That makes me happy right now. So that's what I'm pursuing. Um, am I spending the same amount of time working? I would say if I tabulate all the hours, yes, I am. I'm still working about the same number of hours per week, but I have way less clients to manage than I did 15 or 20 years ago. And that to me means I'm doing more of my work on the one side of the camera versus, as you said, on the other side. Um, and that's where I'm happy right now. So that's my focus.
Again, that's an interesting aspect because of course people are different. Some people just like to shoot more, other
Mhm.
people like to shoot less but spend more time marketing to their ideal audience. And I guess that sort of brings us to actually defining your ideal client in the first place and knowing exactly who it is that you actually want to attract and market to. Um, because otherwise you might just, you might just be firing a lot of what's the word?
Blanks.
Blanks. That's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's the word I'm looking for. Um, but yeah, just starting with like, okay, who's your ideal client? Who is it exactly that I want to attract, and then pour your time and budget into doing that. Although in German, there's a saying that goes, how does it go? Kleinvieh macht auch Mist. That's the saying. It basically means little animals also create a lot of um, shit, basically. And so, what that means is, even if you have a lot of small clients, that can actually help you keep your business at least over water whilst you're trying to attract larger clients. There's a good example is actually the pandemic. One of the mistakes I made, and I've mentioned this many times on this podcast, but one of the cardinal mistakes I made before the pandemic was that my entire business at a time was built on literally one pillar, which was conferences. So I used to shoot a lot of conferences at a time, which was lucrative. It was great. And also, did allow me to travel. And my clients were international corporates, but for the most part. Um, and that was fantastic until March 2020, when the pandemic hit, and literally the entire conference and convention sector
Gone.
just was just gone, and literally from
Right.
one day to the next, like the entire thing. And I remember sitting there looking at well, my phone kept ringing, and every call I took was a cancellation. I remember, after a few hours of that, I was looking at my diary and thinking, wow, I'm not going to be very busy this year at all. Um, and at that point, I realized that as far as I was concerned, I had just put all my eggs into one basket at that point, and I needed to diversify. Um, which I had a lot of time to think about because especially over here, lockdowns and the pandemic itself dragged on for a good while. So it did allow me to come up with a plan, over like the course of a year and a half or something.
Just hearing that just gives me so much PTSD and anxiety. I was on the other side of it. We ran events
Hmm.
and we tried for so long of rescheduling and pushing dates and then changing the state we were in because every state in the US had different
Oh yeah.
regulations. And like we ended up canceling our big conference or we shifted our big conference to being virtual that year. That there was just no there's no state in the US that's going to allow us to bring 600 people together. Um, but we were trying to host these like small retreats and our last straw was like we finally found a state that would allow us to host it, and we found an outdoor location because that was one of the rules, and it was in the middle of the redwood forest, and then the redwood forest got set on fire.
Oh
The
man.
camp I was like, "I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm done.
I give up. That's it.
I'm" Oh my gosh, it was just painful, but you bring I mean, the coming to the core of it, which is like, what do you want to be doing and having clarity in it, there's no wrong answer. I really wanted for a long time to work in the sports and fitness industry. It was what I was so passionate about. So the first thing I did was I just looked at, all right, well, who's hiring sports and fitness photographers? And the first thing I looked at was what are all the magazines in my city, in my state, and in my region? And I'm just going to call every single one of them. And that's what I did. I was working in marketing at the time. So photography was a side hustle. So every lunch hour, every break I had, every second I got off work, if someone's office was open, I was putting a call in. And I was just saying, my name is James Patrick, and I am working in sports and fitness portraiture, and I would like to contribute to your publication. And here's some samples of my work. And then once I started to generate that, then all of a sudden I realized that there was equity in me being the person who was getting work published in that industry. So how can I monetize that? Well, there are lots of people who want to get published in that industry. Well, let's build an entire awareness around the fact that my work gets published. So all of a sudden, people were hiring me simply because I was shooting for all the media outlets that they wanted to be featured in. And then we really campaigned that for so long, and we were very intentional and aggressive with it. And our event that we were hosting was bringing all the media outlets that we were partnered with in front of our target audience. We were doing everything we could to position ourselves as the media experts for the sports and fitness industry. So you wanna be featured in them, you come to our events. You want to be on the cover, you shoot with us, right? Well, what doesn't exist anymore? Magazines. Not a thing. Not really. Not like they used to be. So that entire industry evaporated, and we saw it coming, like, I mean, that it's been coming for a long time. So, okay, what do we want to be doing next? And it was really like, yes, the evolvement of an industry, or I should say the, uh, dying of an industry forced us to change, but the change was answering the question of what do we wanna do next? And what I wanna do next was different. And so I'm still doing what I want to do, just what I want to do changed, and that's okay.
It's an interesting thing, because and again, it's something we've discussed on this podcast many times, but it's when an event like a global pandemic, hits and in the first instance seems to completely wipe out everything you've known so far in terms of your business. There's two ways that you can react to that. One is to, you know, to break apart in many ways, and the other thing you could do is to actually look for opportunity, in within that chaos sort of thing. And I think the pandemic, as much as it has destroyed a lot of things, like it's certainly destroyed my business at a time, it's also created tons of opportunity. And, we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation if it hadn't been for the pandemic, because my reaction to it was, other than watching Netflix and the Marvel movie marathon several times, you know, was to start a podcast. And, here we are, like nearly 6 years later, actually,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, and, to me, that's indicative of the fact that the best trait I think we can have as creatives is to be curious and to just wonder, "Well, what would happen if?" And then to just play that out and see what happens, and to explore and to test things out, like, I mean, that's I don't think we got into the creative industry for, anything that is definitive, because everything that we do is experimental by design. And so when we take that same level of curiosity and we put it into the business development element, all of a sudden we turn business development into something that can become a lot of fun too.
And that's exactly it. That's exactly what I thought at the time. I thought, like, well, I'm in a creative industry, so let's be creative here and actually create something. And I think that's what it takes. And I think that, in a sense, it's often said that creatives are very bad at business, and there may be some truth to it. But I actually do think that creatives are also capable of creative thinking, which
Mhm.
sets you apart, especially in business.
I would argue that we're really good at business because all we do is help other people's businesses constantly. We help other people's brands. We create the visual assets that represent other people's aspirations for success. We're really bad at turning the lens on ourselves. We're really bad at making ourselves the subject. And we're so comfortable being behind the camera. The idea of, not a physical lens, but a metaphoric lens being turned on us is what we struggle with, because now we're the center of attention.
So let's just finish with this. If anybody's starting out now, anybody's thinking about moving their business to the next level, let's say, what are the three things they should be doing right now?
Identifying who they want to be working with, getting in touch with those people, and finding out ways to give value to those people. Like, What who do you want to be working with? How can you get in touch with them and start building those relationships today? Because you should have been doing it yesterday. Okay, yesterday's over. Let's do it now because you're going to need those relationships tomorrow.
There you go. Brilliant piece of advice, some of which I will take to heart myself. That might be exactly what I'll be doing after the show. James, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for being the guest on the Camera Shake podcast.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on. And once again, kudos to you for launching the show. And I will echo what I said at the beginning, which is platforms like these give people permission to pursue things that they didn't think they could. And that's why I think stuff like this is important. So huge thanks to you for doing the show.
All right, folks, that is it for today. Huge thanks to James for coming on the show. This is one of those conversations that really makes you stop and rethink what it means to be a photographer today. And as always, before we go, let me just recommend another episode I think you'll love. Check out episode 302 with Jeff Carpenter, where we discuss what it takes to succeed as a portrait photographer in 2026. I'm sure you love it. And if you enjoy our content, consider supporting us on buymeacoffee.com/camerashake to help us continue creating and bring you more exciting episodes. It really does mean the world to us. And don't forget, you can check out our official merch like this or this over at www.camerashakepodcast.com and represent the Camerashake community wherever you go. For those of you listening to the audio version, did you know there's a fully fledged video version of this podcast over on YouTube with plenty of examples and visuals to go along with the conversation? Well, if you don't know that, then you've been listening because I keep mentioning it all the time. So just head over to YouTube and search for Camera Shake Podcast. If you're already there, drop us a comment, hit the like button, ring the bell, and share with your friends. Your engagement helps us reach a wider audience all over the world. So thanks for listening and watching. And remember, a new episode drops every Thursday. So make sure you mark that in your calendars, diaries, whatever your kids use these days. Until next time, keep shaking things up in the world of photography, and I'll see you next Thursday.